Welcome to the Daily Dose, where we are currently walking through an overview of the entire Bible. Join us today as we learn the story of Scripture and see God's redemptive plan through Christ from cover to cover. Let's listen to Matt Reister, Director of Christian Crusaders and the Cedar Falls Bible Conference.
Today we're going to be in John chapter 11, verses 17 through 27. This is the next portion of the narrative which covers Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from death. Lazarus, of course, as we talked about in our previous devotion, is the brother of Mary and Martha. And in that previous devotion, we learned that when Jesus heard his friend Lazarus had died, he purposely stayed where he was for 2 more days before he even headed toward Bethany to be with his grieving friends. I'm going to link the same song, Lazarus by Wes King, in the show notes of this devotion, just like I did the previous one. It's a song from back when I was in college that I remember enjoying. Maybe you'll enjoy it as well. And before we dive into the text, let me thank the Family Leader for being our 2023 Daily Dose Devotion sponsor. You can learn more about the Family Leader in the announcements at the end of this devotion. And as always, thank you to the Family Leader for their support. Verse 17. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." I think it's interesting that we get a little bit of a glimpse of Martha and Mary's different personalities here. Martha runs out to meet him and she wants to give him a little bit of a piece of her mind. Why didn't you come earlier? You could have saved him from dying. Mary, on the other hand, stays seated in the house, kind of quiet and to herself. You might recall this scenario back in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. We actually did a devotion on that text. You can find it in episode 717 of this podcast. Jesus went to Mary and Martha's house, and Mary sat at Jesus' feet and listened to him teach while Martha was getting things ready, and she interrupted Jesus and asked him to scold her sister for not helping her get things ready. That, coupled with this text, shows us that Martha is a little bit more outspoken than Mary. Maybe a little more type A, maybe a little more tightly wound, maybe a little higher blood pressure. You can hardly blame her, though, for how she addresses Jesus here. She's thinking, why didn't you come sooner? We're very close friends. This could have all been avoided. Of course, she doesn't know what Jesus knows, which is what John told us in the previous passage, that this situation isn't going to ultimately end in death. In fact, the reason things are playing out the way that they are is so that God and Jesus might be glorified. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." So kudos to Martha for her solid Jewish theology. There were a couple different sects of Jews. You might remember that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did believe in the resurrection. There was always a debate between them. Martha must have been more on the Pharisee side, which might explain why Jews from Jerusalem, which was largely a Pharisee population, were coming out a couple miles to Bethany to be with Mary and Martha as they mourned the loss of their brother. But I don't think Martha quite yet knows how people will access the resurrection on the last day. What we know, based on the story that's been laid out for us in Scripture, that we can see with 20/20 vision as we look back, is that anyone who puts their faith and trust in Jesus Christ will receive the righteousness, the perfection that he lived. They'll receive the penalty that he paid on the cross, which we owe God for our sin, Mark paid on their account, if they put their faith and trust in Jesus. At this point, I think Martha thinks that Lazarus will rise again simply because he's a Jew, simply because he goes through the correct rituals, follows the right laws. But in verse 25, Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." And then I love this part. Jesus turns this statement into a question and puts it right in Martha's lap. Do you believe this? And that's a question that sits in every one of our laps. And so I ask you, do you believe this? That Jesus is the resurrection and the life. That whoever believes in him, though they die physically, they will live. And everyone who lives and believes in him shall never die. He's speaking spiritually. Do you believe this? It's an essential question that we've got to get right. We got to help our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors, fellow churchgoers who might not understand the gospel, religious people like Martha and Mary and Lazarus who don't fully understand what Jesus' message of salvation is all about. Do you believe this? Verse 27, she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. And that, friends, is a solid profession of faith. It would be my wish that everyone within the sound of my voice could answer that question as well as Martha did. Now, before I wrap up, check this out. Chapter 11, verse 25, where Jesus says he's the resurrection and the life and clarifies that whoever believes in him will live even though they die. This is one of the most critical texts in the entire Bible. I don't know exactly what was going through God's mind when he made Jesus stay 2 days longer where he was before he came to Mary and Martha's side, but I just wonder if Jesus hadn't been 4 days late, and instead if he'd have come earlier and saved him before he died, would this critical conversation between Martha and Jesus, which is recorded by John so that the entire world across the last 2,000 years could have clarity about the gospel, would that conversation have happened? In addition to Jesus and God being glorified by the resurrection of Lazarus, which is coming up later in this text, it seems awfully likely to me that one of the reasons Jesus was delayed in coming is so that this conversation could be had and so we could know that he's the resurrection and the life. That anyone who believes in him, even though they physically die, they'll never spiritually die. It makes me think back to our previous devotion, that God is at work doing miracles even when he doesn't answer our prayers the way we want him to or show up when and how we want him to. And this should give us great hope on our hardest day. As should the fact that regardless of whether we die physically, if we trust Jesus, we'll live spiritually forever. Come back for more next time. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.
This is The Daily Dose, a podcast of Christian Crusaders Radio and Internet Ministry. Please subscribe on Apple, Google, or Spotify podcasts, or download the free Christian Crusaders app and share with a friend. Also, prayerfully consider supporting our ministry at ChristianCrusaders.org, where you can find our weekly 30-minute radio broadcast airing on stations around the world since 1936, and where you can listen to our Conversations podcast featuring inspiring interviews with interesting Christians. Special thanks to our 2022 Daily Dose sponsor, The Family Leader. God designed 3 social institutions: the family, the church, and government. At The Family Leader, they are bringing all 3 together, honoring God and blessing our neighbors. Learn how and join them at thefamilyleader.com. We also want to highlight another special ministry partner, the Cedar Falls Bible Conference. Check out conference videos and schedule of events online at cedarfallsbibleconference.com and mark your calendars for Saturday, July 29th through Saturday, August 5th, 2023 for the 102nd Annual Cedar Falls Bible Conference. Thank you for listening, and may God richly bless you.